All right. Well, it's 4:30. We don't have everyone yet, but we can kind of either open it up to like some first kind of questions before we go through the slideshow. If anyone just has any questions about validators, or we could say that for the end. You have any opinions on that, Null?
Go for it, mate. I'm at the disposal of everyone who wants to ask questions.
Cool. Well, let's shake things up and do Q&A first until we get some more people in here before we share these slides. So if you have any questions about running a validator or anything, feel free to just ask to speak and I'll bring you up. Or if you just want to say hello, introduce yourself.
Please do jump up, guys. It's there's no questions a silly question, only silly answers. So even if you're completely new to it and you think your question might be a silly one, just jump up and ask it anyway, and we'll steer you in the right direction. And to anyone who is a new validator or a budding validator or wants to take up validating, just remember to jump on Discord at any time and ask your peers on Discord who are validators. I'm sure there are at least 80% of them out there would want to help everybody when they can and be able to help people get into it, because it's something that if you have just a little bit of knowledge, you can get into and build your skills over time. You don't have to be a DevOps genius straight out of the bat.
Well, I guess I'll go ahead and start with an introduction of myself, and maybe some others will follow suit. So I'm Dan B. I do a couple things. I have like a huge background in like DevOps kind of stuff, SRE. I have a company called Defiantlabs. Me and Kyle from this server as well. We are working there. We are building a couple of products. We're building a tax application for the Cosmos. And more recently, I've started building some validator automation tooling. There's a Terraform module on our GitHub page, which will let you stand up any kind of Cosmos node pretty easily. And then I also do some part-time work over at Strangelove with Andrew on their DevOps team. And he's actually here, so I'm going to bring him up to speak right now too.
I'll introduce myself in the meantime. So my name's Null. I am the operator of Kingnodes. My background is not a technical one. So my background is as a civil engineer. And in the last couple of years, I have become more interested in crypto. And I've always been very interested in DevOps and Linux. And in the last 12 months, I started Kingnodes and started validating and have developed my skills from there. So like I said previously, it's not everyone who's a validator is a career DevOps. So that's me.
Yeah, so I'm Andrew Goen. I work for Strangelove. I have a background in distributed computing, so programming, DevOps, and associated things. Embedded computing, so hardware engineering all the way up to cloud infrastructure. And yeah, excited to talk through validator best practices and potentially go through our Horcrux solution for threshold validation.
Awesome, man. I think a lot of people are excited to hear about that.
And hey guys, I forgot you have to be on mobile to speak on Twitter Spaces, but I'm here now. Like Dan said, I'm his partner, and I'm mostly working on the tax application right now that Dan kind of introduced, and also playing around with nodes and getting familiar with how to run validators. So, yep.
Awesome. Well, looks like we got a good amount of people here, at least similar to the amount that RSVP'd in the Discord server. So why don't we go ahead and get started. In this slideshow, we have, I think, around 8 or 9 best practices that kind of the three of us kind of came up with, and we can kind of do discussions on them. We'll kind of like share our opinions, and then if you have opinions on them, raise your hand. We'll bring you up to speak, and you can share what you think. And this is all being recorded, by the way. So if you know anyone who needs a copy of that, let me know, and I'll help get that out. All right, so my opinion, one of the best practices that you shouldn't do is make sure that you know your infrastructure. What this means is like, say that, so for example, like I know Amazon Web Services best. I have probably about, I don't know, 7 years of experience of doing like enterprise application support in there. So I'm very comfortable choosing that for the Defiantlabs validator because like I'll know how to handle all these kind of issues very easily in there. Anything that comes with like communication of networking, increasing storage, picking the right instance sizes. But I think that's kind of like something that you should do is be comfortable in your environment, whether it's Google, Amazon, whether you have your own bare metal machines, just something that you're comfortable with and that you can address issues in.
So Dan, do you want us to jump in on some of these sections as well and give alternate perspective, or wait to be invited to speak, or how do you want to do this?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Anyone who's tagged a speaker, just jump in at any time if you have comments on it, or if you don't, you can kind of just say no comment. I was thinking it's kind of like panel style, where like we're gonna have 8 points of discussion and each of us kind of share our thoughts on them.
Okay, for sure. Well, I'll jump in here. So there are many different ways to skin a cat when it comes to your infrastructure. So as Dan mentioned, he's comfortable with AWS. I know nothing of AWS, so it's not the go-to for me, for example. We started out using DigitalOcean because it was a comfortable thing to use. It's quite powerful. You can scale your nodes as needed, add storage, etc. So one problem that, am I still on?
Yeah, you're good. I hear you.
Yeah, sorry. So one problem we came across on DigitalOcean is that storage is quite expensive. So we started looking for alternate solutions and ultimately decided that we wanted to go with distributed bare metal solutions, which means using multiple providers to have, you know, main and spare nodes and stuff like that. So you really need to consider your requirements for your machines. If you are using a cloud service, they can get very expensive when you start to get up to high CPU count and high RAM count. Particularly in AWS, the data transfer can get very expensive if you don't keep an eye on it. So if you're a junior validator, that type of option where AWS is very expensive, it might not be the option for you just because of cost restriction. Being a junior validator, while you're lower in the ranks, you're obviously not making the same revenue as you know, someone who's like an SG1 who's at the top and has a lot of revenue to spend on infrastructure. So it is about cost optimization and scaling your servers and requirements as you grow, rather than going all out to the best stuff straight away without being able to really have a revenue stream that can support it.
Hey, so I wanted to follow that comment. When you're talking about like kind of minimizing the cost when it comes to like the network cost on AWS, for example, one thing that we noticed is we started off with 80 for our outgoing and inbound peers. And I think it was like around 30 megs per second is kind of like what we were using. And then that was, I think that ended up costing like around $25 a day. And by lowering that to 20, it jumped it down significantly to about $5 a day. Do you have any experience on like how that impacts the validator community as a whole? Like, is that too low? Like, is it like not pulling your fair share of weight, or do you have any thoughts on that?
So you can definitely, like you said, tune your peer counts to tailor the amount of data that you use. It's the effect on the network is not massive if it's only a few people to do that. If everyone tunes their validators down to minimal usage and minimal connections, then it affects new people coming onto the network trying to connect. But it also affects your latency across the network and potentially your ability to sign a block. So if you have very few connections to the network, some of them might be far away, or you just have less opportunities to have a low latency into the network when you're gossiping around transactions and your votes. But Andrew might have a better understanding of that than what I do.
Oh, yeah, I think you covered most of it. You're definitely balancing how quickly the validators can move through consensus with how quickly full nodes that are out in the edges of the network can pull those blocks from the validator network and just support the network overall. So I think, yeah, you want to make sure you have enough connections to support all of that. But yeah, it is a bit of a balancing act, and there's cost optimization involved with that, as well as just making sure that you are supporting the network overall.
Yeah, and I'll add a quick point to that. So I tend to think that in the lower tens it is pulling your own weight. So the gossip network, if a node already has seen a particular transaction, it doesn't need it anymore anyway. So there's definitely a point of like lower return when every node in the network has, like, let's say every node has 100 peers. All those nodes are going to start seeing transactions that they don't actually need anymore. And it actually bogs the network down to some extent, because you're just trying to, the Tendermint protocol won't actually send a transaction that a node already has, as far as I know. But you basically no longer need to send transactions once everybody is connected to everybody. But I think the question was a good question. Like, at what point does it make sense to, have more or less connected nodes in the network? But I don't think you're like cheating anyone if you have, say 20 peers or something like that.
Yeah, and keeping in mind, maybe allow more inbound connections, just to try and keep open, and less outbound connections overall across the set will sort of allow people to be able to try and get connection into the network as well. A lot of times it can be really hard to find a peer to actually jump on the network when you're starting a new node.
It's all great info. I heard there was some people out there kind of like doing validator scoring based on like some different kind of statistics, and I wonder if they're going to use connections as one, if that's something you can even monitor, like how many connections someone is allowing. Because like I kind of agree with Kyle that I think like newer validators that don't have the funding or the delegations to support some of the high bandwidth costs of being very gossipy should have some kind of grace. But I do also agree that you kind of have like an obligation to spend some of that delegation to make sure the validator is performing correctly by helping newer people on board.
So I don't think you can query a validator's settings in terms of peer connections anyway, but yeah, I hope they don't start getting down to those types of metrics, because it's the value to the network is a bit subjective. But I think we should skip over talking about scoring of validators, because it's a can of worms.
Yep, sounds good. All right. Anyone have any more thoughts on like some of these things, like how you're handling choosing the right sizes for your instance, storage, access control, other cost savings stuff?
So Dan, this may be on I'm sure this probably is on a different slide, but those bullet points capture a lot of stuff, and there's lots of techniques you can do to like minimize the amount of storage your node has, depending on like what you're using it for. So like I'm not sure if that's on a future slide, but there's commands like, you know, force pruning. There's options for how you index transactions that affect like how much storage space your node will need, and all sorts of stuff like that.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, I guess it was kind of more like I imagine there might be some people out there who see in the documentation that it says, hey, you should use an M5 2XL, but like following processes like right sizing, you might realize that, hey, you're only at 50% idle. So you might be able to right size your instance down to something smaller. So just kind of like tips like that. Same thing for storage, like just having an understanding of where's the data being stored, what are your pruning settings, because those will heavily impact how much storage you need and things like that.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that point, Dan. And as you know, I run an osmosis node, and I've definitely found that to be true. Like if you look at the osmosis docs and what they recommend as far as RAM, I think they recommend 64 gigs, and CPU they recommend like 16 CPUs. My node has run perfectly fine with half of that for quite a long time, and only during epoch reward. So for osmosis, that's, you know, the daily reward distribution that they do. Does it ever come anywhere close to using up the CPU on the machine? And then instead of doing 64 gigs of RAM, I did 32 gigs of swap space and like 16 gigs of RAM, and it still runs fine. So I definitely agree with that point. A lot of these teams are overestimating what you actually need to run their software, or they might be future proofing, so to speak, as well. But I definitely think people running nodes or validators should experiment for themselves and ask people that are in that community to figure out what the actual configurations are that will work for that chain.
Yeah, or even just inspecting it themselves, right? Like looking at the usage and being like, hey, I was told I need to use 2 terabytes, but I only have 400 gigs on here. Like, do I really need this? Just kind of thinking those things through for yourself, I think is a good practice to get into. And as you learn things that could save the entire community, either money or something like that, sharing those kind of things, being like, hey guys, did you know if you change your pruning that you can operate on 600 gigs instead of 2 terabytes?
Right. And yeah, I think the different node types come into play there too, because if you're running an RPC node cluster, then I think adding some swap in there definitely makes sense, because it's only going to be, you know, during epoch time on osmosis, for example, that's really going to come into play, or during the upgrade handlers. But with the validators, might make more sense to have physical memory to get through the epoch, just so that you're recovering as soon as possible from that epoch block, so that you can participate in consensus. But you can play around with those things and benchmark it, just to see, you know, if I add some swap, am I missing the block after the epoch block, for example? So yeah, I think all of those things can be fine-tuned.
Totally agree, Andrew. And I also noticed that on my osmosis node, by the way, to your point, my osmosis node does not probably does not keep up during the epoch. So if it were a validator, I would probably need to use more physical memory, as you said.
I have a couple of points to add to that. So if it depends on the type of network a lot. So if you have a COSM-WASM network that you're running on, they tend to have some weird behavior sometimes that may need a lot of RAM all of a sudden. So the majority of the network having a lot of RAM sort of safeguards the network falling over under certain instances. So certainly if you can't afford or don't want to run a lot of RAM on those particular networks. As Andrew mentioned, it is a good idea to have a decent swap file on NVMe that can pick up the slack. So just keep in mind that if you have an underperformant node, and a lot of people have an underperformant node, that it'll affect the network performance, particularly on Cosmos and chains.
Awesome. Great points. All right. Well, let's move on to best practice number 2. All right. Sentries. So there's kind of like, I don't know. So like, what do you guys think of when you hear the term sentry versus validator? Like, what is the role of a sentry? What is the role of a validator? And what is their relationship to each other?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting definition, because if you look at the typical DMKMS setup that involves sentries, you kind of think of the sentries as being separate from the validator, because with that setup, it's kind of like you have your separate validator node and the remote signer behind it, and then the sentries in front of it. When we look at more of like the Horcrux orchestration, we actually don't need that separate validator node, from the TMKMS perspective in the middle. So it's really just the Horcrux nodes behind the sentry nodes. So for that definition, I kind of look at it as the sentries and the Horcrux nodes are the validator, all composed together. So I think the definition gets a little tricky there, but yeah, I think for all of these remote signer scenarios, or even if you're not using a remote signer and just having the node with the key on it behind the sentries, that it's kind of the same sort of deal where you're introducing these lightweight nodes in front of your signing infrastructure that can distribute the load, and you make sure that you're adding some fault tolerance and high availability to those front runner nodes that are communicating directly with the peer-to-peer network.
So, Andrew, just to add to that, so so it's not necessary, like sentries are an option. They aren't absolutely required. So, yeah, so you hear a lot of people talk about using sentries, but just know that they are an option in your configuration, and you can choose to run them or not depending on your own circumstances. So, for example, if you are a new validator, again, so I'm trying to look at this from the perspective to junior validators, right? So say you want to get your feet wet, and you just want to get in there and try validating. You can overall improve your security and your availability with sentry nodes, right? So what that means is that you may have a bit more protection against a DDoS attack on your validator, which is someone trying to stop you from signing blocks. And you will also have a better distribution into the network of availability of your validator into the network, right? So overall, that might mean that you may miss fewer blocks. That's not always a problem anyway with the current traffic loads on most networks. And yeah, you have a little bit better protection against DDoS attacks and potentially your signing material. So when you look at it from a perspective of what's important security-wise to protect your to protect the network and yourself against someone getting your signing material, which would mean that someone could double sign you and knock you out of the set. You really want to make sure that you're securing that material. So if you're doing that with a remote signer and you don't have any material on your validator, those attack vectors on your actual your actual validator machine, which isn't got any signing material on it, might not be as great. So if you have your signing material on your validator, then it could be a very good use case to put sentries in front of it just to stop that extra, vulnerability of people being able to get in through a P2P port or something like that. So, yeah, but like Andrew said, there are other solutions out there, particularly Horcrux, which these guys are improving day on day, which distributes your keys and your availability by having multiple, I'm air quoting sentries because that's the terminology that's used for your nodes that also do signing. Your nodes that are out in the network that are sort of your validator nodes, but sort of your sentries as well. It's a bit confusing, isn't it, Andrew?
Yeah, that's where it gets a little confusing. Because we don't have a separate validator node. So yeah, technically under our definition, a sentry is required to run Horcrux. At least one sentry. But yeah, it's doing the task of sending those block sign requests over to the Horcrux cluster, and then also handling that response and pushing that out as evidence to the chain that you've signed the block.
Yeah, so it's a little confusing in that when you talk about TMKMS, which is a soft signer, there is only one TMKMS unit and there is only one validator out in the wild, which can be connected then behind sentries, right? But it's just strange because we don't, in this instance, we don't call the validator a sentry when they probably should. But in any case. So anyway, the whole point of that was just that you don't necessarily have to have sentries if you're a new validator, and it really should be a risk-based analysis and a cost analysis to see whether they are worthwhile for you. But if you look at it purely from what's the maximum security perspective, then you'll always land on having sentries.
That's some great points, guys. Appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I'd like to encourage a lot of the validators to do in general is just like understand what the intention was when the concept of the sentry came out. And there's a lot of different ways you can achieve that same thing without using a sentry, like you guys had mentioned before. So just understand, like, what are the risks to the validator? Like, I need to make sure I'm protecting my signing key. I need to make sure that my validators are available in case of a outage in like a region or a data center. And then using all of your experience of infrastructure, going back to slide 1, you can solve that many ways. One way might be using a sentry. One way might be using a remote signer with a Horcrux. But yeah, just kind of thinking, getting to like the root cause or the root understanding of why the concept exists is how I like to think of a lot of things.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I really want to encourage people to do like a cost benefit analysis when they're looking at which solution is right for them, because if you go all out on a sentry solution with a remote signer and a validator node, and say you've got 3 sentries, that's like 5 boxes that you're trying to support. And if you don't have a revenue to support that, you're not going to last very long. You're just going to be spending a lot of money. So you have to sort of imagine what is the value that someone's going to get out of you if they're trying to hack you, right? And if you don't have a high value thing to hack, well, why are you spending all this money on security when someone's likely not going to want to even hack you anyway, or DOS you or whatever else. But so because we are a recently formed junior validator, we really put a lot of thought into cost benefit of things and cost optimization when we first started out so that we could survive. But if you ask Andrew on the same subject, I'm pretty sure he would say that the best option is to have sentries, but they're just different perspectives from different levels of validator. Sorry, I'm putting words in your mouth, Andrew.
Oh, that's all good. Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with that, but you don't have to pollute the cost by introducing the sentry necessarily. For example, with the Horcrux having that sentry that's doing both the syncing of the chain and sending the sign requests, not needing that separate validator node behind the sentry does keep the cost down. So yeah, we have a sentry, but you really only need one of them. We run 3 sentries for each of our validators, but we just have the lightweight Horcrux cosigner nodes behind that, where each node is like 1 CPU and 1 gigabyte of RAM each. So they don't actually need to be the requirements of the chain for syncing blocks. But yeah, so then you have your sentry node, so you have your single high cost node, and then you have your Horcrux cosigners behind that, which are very lightweight. So there's also all kinds of ways that you can optimize the cost, thinking about security and availability as you kind of balance those things.
Yeah, so I was kind of referring to just the validator sentry recommendation, which is all through the Cosmos docs and stuff like that. But even on the Horcrux side of things, as you say, there are many ways that you can optimize cost and availability when you're building that out, and you can change that as time goes along and as your validator becomes more valuable. So, for example, and I'm not saying people do this or would do this, but even with Horcrux, there's different ways to scale out in Horcrux. For example, and Andrew might be shaking his head when I say this, but for example, you could have just a 1-of-1 Horcrux signer if you didn't want to have 3, and you could have just 2 sentries out in the wild for it to pick between, or you could have 3 sentries out in the wild, or you can have 10 signers network together if you wanted to with just 1 sentry out in the wild. I don't know why anyone would do that, but that's something you could do.
Right. Yeah, so I mean, for the actual threshold validation, it does require a minimum of 3 nodes, but Horcrux does have a single signer operation where it just behaves basically like a TMKMS soft signer. And yeah, you can run that behind a sentry as well.
And that operation you can connect to multiple sentries though, right?
Correct.
Yeah, which is a clear advantage over just having TMKMS, which can only connect to 1. Right. And for people to understand why that's an issue, when you are connecting your sentry to your signer, it has to be connected for it to advance blocks on the sentry. So with Horcrux, you can have 2 sentries out there talking back to the signer, and they'll both advance. So, for example, if you had just TMKMS and you had a sentry, which should be called a validator, you had your validator out there, and then a spare node. If something happened to your validator, when you have to keep your spare node syncing without listening for a TMKMS. So, if you want to switch it over, you have to go and change the IP that your TMKMS server is looking for, and then you have to change the configuration on your validator node or your sentry node, whatever you want to call it, that is listening for the signer. So you have to change it from using a local key to then listening for a key coming in, and then reset it, and then it'll get a connection, and then it'll keep advancing blocks. So with the Horcrux solution, you can have it talking to both of those sentries. So if one is knocked out, it'll just automatically keep going on the other one, and vice versa. So it is a much better solution.
Perfect, guys. Any other thoughts on this before we go to item 3? All right. So there's going to be a lot of synergy between some of these items, and we kind of talked a little bit about high availability as well. But maybe we can talk about like some best practices for handling like upgrades for the binaries and stuff like that. Do any of you guys have any thoughts on that?
Sure.
Yeah.
So, all right, sorry, you go ahead, Andrew. I've talked a lot already.
All good. Yeah, so depending on the type of upgrade, there's ways that you can handle that without downtime. So for the nice rolling upgrades where it's like, hey, validators, can you please apply this upgrade before this block height? It's nice that you can just, with the multi-sentry architecture, you can just do one at a time And that way you always have a sentry that's talking to your remote signer, and you don't miss any blocks through that process. For the, set the halt height upgrades, you can kind of do a similar thing where, you just go around round robin and set the halt height and restart them on each one. And that way, when they hit the halt height, they'll all halt. And then it's kind of a race of how quickly you can apply the upgrade and get those back online. But some of the really cool upgrades I've seen is that they'll push out like the new version, and it will have the upgrade handler in it that will execute at the block height. And those are kind of my favorite, where it's like, validators, get around to it whenever you can, as long as you apply it before this block height. And then as long as we have 2/3 of voting power that have applied that upgrade by the time we get to that height, the nodes will very quickly run the upgrade and smooth sailing moving forward. For that previous scenario, there are ways that you can kind of automate the halt height upgrades. There's Cosmovisor is one. It's a little controversial, but that's one solution that is definitely getting better at handling those automated halt height upgrades as well.
Yeah, Andrew. So I was going to ask, being mostly just a node operator myself so far, I obviously don't have the availability concerns, but my understanding of the recommended best practice, I guess I shouldn't say recommended best practice. My understanding of what most people use is they use Cosmovisor, and they basically put the upgrade binary in the correct location prior to the upgrade height, and then Cosmovisor handles the automatic changeover from the previous binary for for whatever chain you're on to the new binary at the correct upgrade height. I think that's what you were saying by the automated handler, but I'm not sure.
So that actually applies more to the middle scenario I mentioned, which, if you're not using Cosmovisor, then when it gets to the halt height, you have to manually apply that upgrade. But if you are using Cosmovisor and it works as expected, then you can just drop that new binary in there, say, set the halt height, and it will do the upgrade at the expected height. But there is actually another kind of upgrade that takes care of it without using Cosmovisor, where they'll push out an upgrade and say, at this block height, it will execute the V10 upgrade, and then it is essentially running on the previous version of code until it gets to that height, and then applies the upgrade and continues with the new version. So I've seen that a couple of times, and those are really nice. But Cosmovisor is pretty good. We don't personally use that for our stack. So when there is a halt height upgrade, we'll just set the halt height on our nodes, do the round robin so that we don't take any nodes out of signing while that is occurring, and then we'll be online for when the upgrade happens. And we also deploy in Kubernetes, so we have Docker images that are ready to go for the next version. So we're not doing any kind of binary swapping for that process.
Can we talk a little bit about when the halt instruction is not posted on chain, like how validators can know, hey, I need to make sure that I don't sign stuff with an old block and get a corrupt database and have to do a restore?
Yes, I mean, most times the teams will push out a upgrade on the same version, like a patch version on the same version that will have a halt height baked into it. And that way it will just panic or stop when it gets to that halt height. So then, if you have Cosmovisor, if you're manually doing it, then you can handle it at that point. But there are some times where maybe there's not enough time, and the teams will just say, "Hey, please set your halt height in the config," we'll all shut down and apply the upgrade at this time.
And worst case, there could be like a validator who's on vacation or whatever, and they miss the window, and their database ends up getting corrupt, right? Where they would have to basically resync from the validators who did do the upgrade properly to get back in.
Yeah, exactly. So if they don't have that, that patch version, if that was the way that it was done, then their their node will try to sync past the upgrade height, and they'll run into an app hash error most likely. And then they're going to have to restore from a snapshot or from a state sync if that's available on the chain. But yeah, they're going to be stuck with a database that needs restoring if they're not around. But luckily, you know, if they're not more than 1/3 of voting power, then that's okay, and they can restore it and unjail if they need to, and get back into the set.
I think in some instances, there's a rollback feature that's been implemented in the last little while on some chains where if that happens, you can roll back, right, Andrew, to one block to try and recover your database if you put in a new binary.
I'm not aware of a mechanism like that, but yeah, that would be great. I'm sure it's in the works. Yeah, but yeah.
I think, for example, you might be able to do that on Stargaze. I think they've got the rollback command. I'm just not 100% sure in what instances that works. But I do know it can recover you from some types of app hash errors. So, but just a few notes. So Cosmovisor has come a very long way in the last 6 to 9 months. It used to be highly problematic, particularly on Cosmosm chains, and it would exit your binary a lot depending on what logs it was getting through, and various things that cause problems. But it's come a long way, and it's a pretty good option these days for doing automated upgrades. It can sometimes be slow if you don't have the right flag set, and you might back up your database if you don't want it to, which, if it's big, can take a long time and have you late to the party for the upgrade. But Andrew, I just wanted to ask, what is a recent example of that automated handler execution at a block height? Because I haven't come across that before, and that sounds really cool.
I'm trying to remember specifically what it was, whether it was like Osmosis v10 or it might have been OmniFlix. But yeah, it was basically just, here's the new version, apply it, and then once it gets to the upgrade height, it will apply the upgrade and move on. And so yeah, it ended up being like a 10-minute upgrade process. Yeah, let me look through my Discord to see if I can find the example of that.
That's really awesome, and I think if more networks start to use that, that would be a really good outcome.
Yeah, it would be great to standardize on something that's painless like that.
What do you guys think about this last bullet point? Have you done any stuff with like GeoIP, like having like a server over in Australia, for example, versus in the States for the different kind of people that are going? Like, do you find that is good to be close to your audience kind of thing?
So geo distribution of servers is good for the network, bad if you're a validator. And I say that because if you have a sentry over near the center of mass that can maintain a good connection and low latency into the network, is okay if you have your main validator a little bit further away. But mostly speaking, and this is bad practice for the network, but to make sure that you hit all the blocks, you want to be sort of close to the center of mass to have the lowest latency into the network. But it is better for the network to be geo-distributed in terms of catastrophe and stuff like that, and access to the network for the users. So
when you
for
say
example,
center of mass, what do you mean by that? Like where most validators are?
Yeah, so it's a strange, so it's probably an engineering term. I'm a civil engineer, is my profession, so I probably use some silly terms sometimes. But what I mean is the where the bulk of the servers are. So if you looked at the distribution of the say every server was a little red dot on a map, and you look at the distribution of them, you would see there's a lot of little red dots around like Europe and America. So if you go and put a node in Australia, it's a long way away from where those servers are, and that's a lot of hops to get into the network. So if you have a validator in Australia it'd be a very good idea to have a tunneled connection to a Sentry in Europe to have a good connection into the network. So, Andrew, you might have some more comment on that.
Yeah, I think you covered it. You want to make sure you're not preventing consensus at any point. And you will see that with, are you missing blocks or not, for most cases. But yeah, like with our Crescent validator, we deployed that over in Asia just so that we could be close to the center of mass, like you're saying.
So in Australia, there's no great build-up of nodes over here for anything. And everything costs a fortune here, and the network bandwidth costs a fortune, and we're a long way away from anything. So it's not really a good idea to run validator nodes over here, but it would be a good service for me to run RPC nodes over here and have that behind a load balancer for the network if they're running one, so that there's just more points of presence for the network.
All right, well, let's move on to best practice number 4, which is security, talking about how to lock down these machines, either from like the infrastructure level or from the host level. I've included a couple snippets from what you guys contributed, but feel free to start discussing this.
Yeah, so I guess like I would have a very different approach to this to what say Andrew would, because he's running in Kubernetes clusters, which is a completely different kettle of fish to running in say bare metal or in a cloud infrastructure. But it would be good practice if you have remotely accessed servers to lock down your SSH. So I think these were a couple of things that I mentioned that could help improve your SSH situation. So one really good thing to do is to change your SSH port. So really, SSH is access to your server, right? So one way that hackers will try to get into your SSH is just brute forcing passwords on the root account, which is really common. And if you have an open SSH port and you look at your logs, you'll most likely see brute force attempts on your SSH port. So some easy ways to mitigate against that particular attack is to change your SSH port away from 22. Lots of people use 222. I don't recommend that either. I would say change it to something that's not got 2s in it. Also, you can use fail to ban, which is a software that will ban IP addresses accessing your server after certain amounts of attempts on your SSH login port. You can remove the root account entirely from SSH through your SSHD config file and restarting your daemon, which means that the root account no longer exists in terms of logins to your server. So you can still, sudo su into your root account from another account, but you can't log into it through the SSH interface. You can also use certificate-only logins, and also a different thing that some people use is 2FA logins, and just remove password logins altogether so that you can't be brute forced into a login. So they're probably the main things that I would do when hardening access for SSH. I don't know if anyone else has anything else to add to that.
Yeah, I was going to make one comment on.
Kyle.
Go ahead, Kyle.
I agree with you on SSH. Just going back a little bit to the initial question about like security overall, I would say my approach when I deal with a new application, like say when I first started running my osmosis node, is to figure out how the application functions in terms of port security and like what interfaces are open to the world by the application, from the standpoint of like what the default settings are, what the recommended settings are. So like, let's say I took a script from the Osmosis team to set up the node. I would want to understand like what ports is that script opening on my machine, and then what are the additional ports that are open on my machine. Like you were saying, SSH is obviously one of them. And from a security best practices standpoint, and going back to what Dan was saying about like knowing what infrastructure you're operating on, like what is the best way to address those concerns? And the way I usually frame it is like, I look at those open ports and I think about whether or not I actually need access to that service. So for example, everyone that's running a node needs access to the P2P network. That was, I guess, one of the first things I learned when I started running a node. But not everyone needs to have like the gRPC web server on, or the REST web server on. But depending on like how your chain is configured by default, those things might be on by default. And depending on what infrastructure you're running on, there's probably a different way to lock that down. Like you were saying, Andrew, if he's running Kubernetes clusters, there's going to be different settings in Kubernetes than you would have on your bare metal Linux servers, but you guys have to address the same underlying issue, which is how do you best secure your infrastructure? And just like Dan does, I have a AWS background, but I'm currently running my node on Linode just because I found that it was cheaper overall. So on Linode, like the firewalls work differently, but I still used the firewall primarily, the cloud-based firewall from Linode, to address my port security, which is very similar conceptually to what you do in AWS with like security groups, or there are other things you can do in AWS, but most people use the EC2 instance security groups. So yeah, anyways, go ahead, Dan or Andrew.
Oh yeah, I was just going to kind of comment on a few other things that we didn't mention yet. Like another option is you can use a VPN to have a secure connection where you don't even expose SSH at all to the public internet, which is one good way to do it. Another way is you can use whitelist, like all your admins that are going to manage it, like create a security group or firewall rule that only allows you in, and that way you can still prevent most of the script kiddies out there who are scanning for open SSH ports. I think a lot of those tools also look for ports below 10,024, which I think is the default for Nmap scans. So if you pick a higher port number, a lot of times you'll kind of like filter out those people scanning for you as well too.
Yeah, absolutely agree with those additional security points on your SSH. Just on what Kyle was saying, so in terms of ports, as an example of what we open, we only we do have an SSH port, but it's a random port number. We have P2P to get connection to the network, and we have our what's the other port we have open, which is the monitoring for our monitoring connection is the only ports that we ever have open. So on a validated node anyway. Yeah, we don't use Prometheus, but yeah, so we use Zabbix for our nodes. But yeah, so we changed the port number though from standard. I think the standard's like 10050. So we just change it to something else. It's good practice to probably just change any standard ports on that you're exposing. So we never really use 26656, I think is the standard P2P port. We always change the first three numbers in the ports just to be different.
Hey, Dan, did you mention Sessions Manager as well? Like, I mean, obviously that's AWS specific, but I thought maybe you would want to talk about that.
Yeah, so if any of you guys are running your validators on AWS, SSM is a really cool way to do it. It uses I kind of want to discourage it because it uses Amazon magic that I don't understand how it works, but it's basically, I think it's like a tunnel over the TLS connection to the Amazon AWS.com management interface. But yeah, if you do like an Nmap, it will not show up at all on there. But it allows you to connect very easily either through command line tools. Like whenever I go into my instance, I just type SSM and then the instance ID number, and it tunnels me in. And it also has like nice interfaces with the web console too, where you can just kind of click connect and it'll bring you right in. But that's very specific to Amazon. I do think Google Cloud has some stuff like that too, tailored to their environment.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to say a little bit about our security practices too. So I mean, they look a little different from more of an OS level security approach. Since we're using Kubernetes, we don't have SSH enabled at all on the kube nodes, but we do have a private control plane. In order to access that, you have to go through a jump box that's in the VPC. So yeah, all the nodes are in a VPC. We actually have a separate cluster for the Horcrux nodes from the Sentry nodes, and the Sentry nodes do have a public IP, and through the Kubernetes settings, we have the P2P port exposed to the internet, but that's the only thing that is exposed out of our Validator infrastructure. But yeah, internally, we have the privval address. That port is accessible from the sentries by the Horcrux cosigners. That's going to flip in one of the future Tendermint releases, because it's going to actually be the sentries that will reach out to the remote signer via gRPC. But yeah, we're just maintaining one port that is open between the remote signer and the sentries there. For monitoring and alerting, we have the ports. We use gRPC and the Prometheus port for pulling monitoring metrics out of there. Those are only exposed internal to the VPC, and then we have those collectors and other applets that are collecting those metrics inside the same VPC. We have one that's pushing alerts up to Discord, but that way, yeah, we're not really exposing anything from the nodes out to the internet. And then additionally, for the containers, we maintain a container repository, and it is just around the clock looking for new versions of the chain node software for the chains that we operate on, building those images. And those are just basic Alpine containers where it just drops the binary in that's built with the Linux Mosul library. And then on top of that, it's a lockdown user. There are no permissions outside of just basic maintenance. So you can do things like edit the config file, but otherwise you really have no permission to do anything inside of the containers.
Awesome. It's great stuff. Okay. We've talked about key management a little bit, but are there any kind of like other practices you want to talk about? Like maybe we could talk about like how people could mature from like starting off with like something like priv validator key JSON, how they would switch over to TMKMS soft, and then maybe upgrade to something like Horcrux. And also, do you guys think that like UBHSM has like a role here as well too, or should everyone be using a solution like Horcrux, which is highly available, which is my understanding that UBHSM would not support that unless you maybe have the same consensus key on multiple hardware security module devices in a physical data center?
Right, yeah, and then you get into the same problems that we had to solve with Horcrux of how do you prevent double signing. So yeah, I mean, having a UB behind Horcrux is something that we're looking at for the future. Right now, yeah, we don't support using an HSM, but yeah, I think if you're validating with a priv validator key, you definitely have plenty of options for locking that down. I would suggest don't even run a validator if you're going to be using the priv validator key on the same node that's talking to the network. Because yeah, even as much as you lock it down, there's still that risk with that node being so close to the internet.
Yeah, so the risk there is that you have the port exposed, right? Like the RPC or P2P port exposed. And if there's ever like an exploit in there and they get like a privileged escalation attack on that box, they'd be able to grab your key. And that's why you want that kind of separation.
Right. So yeah, I mean, even if you're only exposing the P2P, I mean, you never know. There could be, you know, like a dirty pipe or something exposed through the Tendermint P2P that would give you some sort of shell access to read out that key. So, you know, just not worth risking that at any point.
Yeah, it's so easy to run a soft signer that you'd just be mad to use the priv key on your actual validator. And a signer you can completely lock down. It doesn't have to have any inbound ports at all.
Yep, and I can definitely attest to that because I recently worked with Null, and maybe in like about half an hour, we were able to migrate my setup from Priv Validator over to TMKMS Soft. And I agree, it was pretty simple to do.
So, yeah, like we have made some scripts that make it super easy, but I would recommend your first go round that you actually do as Dan did and read about it, know what it does, manually do it so you know what's going on. And then if you choose to use a script to make it easier later on, read through the script, make sure it's doing the things that you want it to do before using it if anyone else has scripted that, because it's a security-based thing, and you know you want to make sure that it's only doing the stuff that you want it to do. So you know, a little bit on the HSMs, they're a little bit difficult to use in that to use a HSM you need to have it in somewhere that you can physically access to plug it in. So if you're using cloud services like AWS, it makes it impossible to use a HSM because you can't go on and plug it into the server. And even if you can go to a colo or something like that and plug it in, I mean, that's a public access area in a lot of ways where other users can come and access those machines as well. So there's every chance that someone could steal your HSM from the box. So if you're going to use them, they have to be in a location that is secure, and they have to be in a location that has a high availability to the internet. And those two things together are rare, which makes it difficult to use a HSM, is my take on that. And probably the best solution in my mind is Horcrux, having the sharded keys, and you can completely lock down those boxes other than a little bit of comms between the Horcruxes and the sentries. So yeah, definitely use a remote signer anyway.
Awesome. And I hope you don't mind, but I just pinned a tweet pointing to the tool that you created for setting up TMKMS as well.
Yeah, so worth noting that was I took other people's work and I just made it into one spot, easy to use. So actually, I think it was Schultze from Lavender 5 actually gave me the brief on how it works and how to make it work easily, and I just turned it into a script. And I think it was Dylan from Imperator that actually had one of those other scripts that I just changed to make it universal. So not all my work, but definitely an easy way to get up and running.
Can one of you guys talk a little bit about key backup? Like, say that you do have your key split into multiple shards using Horcrux, or you do have a soft sign key. How are you making sure that if something happened, you could recover that?
So you definitely need to back them up. So what we do is we back them up onto multiple USBs and encrypt them with a passphrase when we put them onto the keys, onto the USBs. So high quality USBs, multiple copies and encrypted is how we back up our keys. And yeah, it's a must, because if something happens, say if you've got a soft signer and something happens to that soft signer and it's unrecoverable, then your validator's unrecoverable. So
What do you think about paper keys? Like when I've looked at the content of like priv validator JSON, like it's pretty small in characters. Like it's something that you could probably write down and like keep in a safe. Do you think that's a valid thing to do ever?
yeah, you absolutely could do that, but you would just, if you did do that, make sure that you first write it down and then come back into a file and then test before you take it as gospel, because it is a lot of characters, and it can easily be stuffed up. So if you're going to do that, I would probably, instead of writing it on paper, I would probably print it and put it into a safe or something like that as a paper key, rather than manually writing it down. It's not quite the same as if you were using a ledger, for example, for your crypto. You want that seed phrase to never have been on a computer, so that's why you write it down on paper rather than printing it out, because it's not available on a computer. But with your priv key, it's going to at some point have been available on a computer anyway, where you'd be able to print it out locally. So yeah, it's entirely a possibility. Yep. I guess the one caveat is that it is then in plain text. So if someone came across it, they would be able to use it.
Makes sense. Andrew, do you have any advice on key management?
Yeah, so I mean, just for securing the key, we follow pretty much the same practice as Null there. We'll generate the ED25519 private key in ephemeral Docker container, and then copy and paste that into a Horcrux container to shard the key. And then we will copy and paste those key shards into the Kubernetes secrets through the Kubernetes commands. And then we will do that same thing of taking the private key, the full private key, not the shards. We don't really need the shards after they've been loaded in as Kubernetes secrets. And we can put those on a couple different USB drives, distribute those geographically. And then we know, we have a couple of backups just in case we ever needed to reshard them.
Awesome. All right, well, let's move on. A few more to go. Whoops. All right. Automation when it comes to maintaining validators. So any things like easily patching your systems, redeploying your entire infrastructure, using it to scale, to maintain configuration management in case like an admin goes in and enables PEX on a validator and you want PEX to be off. What kind of tools are you guys using? What kind of tips do you have in regards to automation?
Yeah, so currently we're using Terraform to spin up all of the infrastructure for the Kubernetes-enabled Horcrux validator. But right now we only have Terraform for the initial deployment, and then after that it's all just interacting with the Kubernetes cluster manually. So yeah, Dan is actually working with us to help clean that up so that we can kind of bring the things like the config management and automated upgrades up to the Terraform level, more of the infrastructure as code level, so that those tasks can be further automated. But I think, if you're in a cube stack, then tools like Terraform, a couple others we're looking into, Dan, I'm sure you could talk about those, are Customize and related tools for doing the config management, Helm charts, and so on.
Exactly. Yep. I have a lot of experience with using Terraform for deploying stuff, but as far as configuration management, I'm still figuring that out. But yeah, Customize looks promising from some of the research that I've done. And then I believe there's one other one. I think HashiCorp makes a product for config management too that I was going to look at. What about you, Null? What are you guys doing for config management?
I'm basically an ape when it comes to config management. I do everything manually. I'm currently learning Ansible, but like I said, I'm my background is not DevOps, so I have learnt everything that I know from this point of view over the last probably year and a half, 2 years, other than general Linux knowledge that I already had. So yeah, it's very much a learning experience for us, and we're not at the point yet where we're pushing out automated configs to servers, and we use a lot of different servers over a lot of different providers. So we're working out how automation fits into our stack at the moment and learning what we need to learn and testing. So we hope that, in the next few months, we might be able to start deploying automation after we're comfortable with it. But yeah, still very much a learning experience for us.
That's awesome. I'd actually kind of like to poll the audience on this one too. If any of you guys out there do have experience doing config management, or you feel like you have any kind of tips in this area, or even in previous areas, feel free to request to speak and I'll bring you up. We'd love to have some more people in here. Okay. I don't see any requests yet. So let's go ahead and talk about backups and snapshots and state syncs and what kind of options are in there. So I guess I can talk a little bit about this based on my experience with, I can talk about the Strangelove stuff I'm doing, right, Andrew, for backups?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so as Andrew mentioned, Strangelove is using Google Kubernetes engine for it. And we were able to implement a manual backup solution to start, where basically all of the data for the nodes is kept on the PVCs, the persistent volume claims. It's basically the storage in Kubernetes. And we were able, using Google, to basically say, hey, in real time, basically we want to freeze the file system on one of our sentries. So we just pick like one out of the 6 or whatever. And then we basically take a snapshot of the PVC, and then we restart the file system. So there's very minimal downtime at all when the snapshot's even happening. And then say that a node does get corrupted and you have to rebuild it. So like some of the options you have out there, right, is you can do things like you can download a snapshot from like an awesome service like Polkachu, where they have those LZ4 compressed tarballs. But those things can take a little bit of time to actually download. So like your mean time to recovery might be something like, I don't know, 30 minutes to download the archive, another 5 minutes to extract it, and then another 5 minutes for your node to ingest it and like start up, and then whatever time it takes to catch up to the latest block height. When you're using like block storage based backups like EBS snapshots in Amazon or PVC snapshots in Google Cloud, we were able to get the mean time to recovery in Strangelove into very, very quick, like around probably 10 minutes or less of a mean time to recovery, where it's fully back up to the chain state. And I'm pretty happy with that kind of downtime.
Yeah, so I'm very, very excited to have this snapshot service that Dan is helping us build out, because previously we've been reliant on third-party snapshots. Chainlayer and Polkachu both provide great services for that. But yeah, there is some overhead, like Dan was saying, with the LZ4 extraction and obviously the download. But yeah, there's other solutions like StateSync. Love StateSync when it works, for the validators especially, because you really don't need any block history for the validators. So StateSync allows you to just sync from a couple different peers in the network to get the latest state of the state machine. And then it can just continue on from there, from the current state of the chain. But there's very few chains that support StateSync at this time. And there are some difficulties with CosmWasm coming into the pictures for continuing to support StateSync. So excited for that. But yeah, having a backup strategy is definitely essential. And I think, it's hard to be dependent on third-party snapshots too, because if everyone is trusting the same third-party snapshot, you do have a higher risk of a malicious attack making it into the network and actually being trusted. Very low chance of that, but still good to have your own backup strategy.
Is the only requirement for StateSync that a chain is running Tendermint version 0.34 or above, and that someone is making a sync available? Or are there more requirements?
So I know with Osmosis, they were saying that StateSync was going to be supported until the first CosmWasm contract was going to be deployed. Really, Cosmos Hub and Osmosis are the only places I've seen StateSync work reliably. I'm sure there are others, but yeah, I don't know exactly what implementing StateSync means on a per chain basis. But yeah, the nodes do have to turn on the StateSync snapshot mechanism, so they have to provide those over the peer-to-peer port, and you set like an interval for how many blocks between snapshots, and then the consumer of those snapshots also has to set the configuration for what is my trusted RPC node, so that you can validate that snapshot. So yeah, very cryptographically secure mechanism for restoring the latest state. So yeah, great when it works. Definitely helpful for the validators. It's not going to be really helpful for anything other than that, because you're not getting any block history. So if you need to do historical queries, even if you're trying to run a relayer against the nodes, it's probably not going to have enough history for you. But yeah, for the validators, it definitely helps when it works.
Just a few notes on StateSync and reducing the size of your nodes. Just keep in mind that it is very important for people out there to maintain full history nodes. So a lot of us do get around using pruned backups and StateSync, and just a good thing to keep in mind is that for everyone who does that, it reduces the amount of full history that's available to sync to. So I did just want to mention that there is some development in StateSync with regards to CosmWasm. So Secret Network recently implemented a working StateSync that'll actually bring across the CosmWasm folder as well into a new node, state syncing. So previously you had been able to state sync for the most part CosmWasm chains if you had the WASM folder with all of the relevant contracts up to the correct block height. You'd still be able to state sync the actual database to go along with it. But if you didn't have that folder, then you'd just get errors when you tried to, after you state synced, you'd get an app hash or something like that. So yeah, there is a development in it, and it is coming along. And shout out to Pokachoo also for providing basically the entire Cosmos with snapshots.
Hey, Null, can you talk a little bit about that Caddy server thing you were telling me about for people that are doing bare metals and maybe want to manage their own backups instead of using someone else's?
Yeah, so Caddy Server is a very easy way to serve files. It's only a flag that you have to put into your config file, and then you can basically just drop all your own snapshots into a folder on your server, and they're available. The reason I mentioned this was because like S3 and block storage and stuff like that is really expensive for this type of file size. So you could potentially get a cheaper bare metal server with a decent amount of storage on it to be able to serve your own files to yourself. And I think if you're good with scripting, you can pretty much have a low-cost bare metal server that you can have a lot of networks on and just state sync and create your own backups that you can copy off in emergencies. So yeah, it is reasonably complex to set up, but it's certainly doable. And Pokachoo makes all of his scripting available, I'm pretty sure, all of his Ansible scripts, so that other people could do the same thing, because I'm pretty sure that's the strategy he's using, except he doesn't use Caddy. Obviously, he serves them from, actually, I'm not sure where he serves them from or how it's served, but I'm pretty sure they're on bare metal servers.
I was kind of curious if it would show on here. So it's hosted on his own domain. So yeah, he's probably using some sort of local solution. Okay. Let's see what we got next. All right, monitoring and alerting. There's another fun one. So basically, the idea behind monitoring and alerting is to catch problems before they happen, right? Like, it kind of sucks getting notified by your delegators at 2 a.m. that your node stopped producing blocks. Like, you need to be on top of this stuff. And all the different Tendermint binaries, they support exporting metrics, and then you can kind of subscribe to them. I have familiarity with Prometheus and Grafana. I know Null mentioned they use Zabbix and Panic and stuff. But yeah, the idea behind this is to keep an eye on what's going on with your nodes. There's all sorts of awesome dashboards. I'm going to skip ahead real quick just so you can see it. That will show you stats about what's going on, so you can find out whether or not. Actually, I'll just show you live stats since I can do this. So these are the live stats for my Kujira node right here. But it'll tell you things about, like, if you're missing blocks at all. So like in the last 24 hours, I've missed 14 blocks. It'll let you know if you're caught up to the right height or not. It'll let you know, like, information about your delegations, so you can kind of have an idea of that. Or people who are redelegating, you might want to know that kind of information. But this gives you all sorts of insight into what's going on, especially at the hardware level. So this dashboard is by Kingnodes, who makes an awesome dashboard. I believe he took 3 popular dashboards and just combined them all into one awesome dashboard. But yeah, you can see like your disk space, you can see your CPU usage, you can see your network traffic. Like, I think I told you guys that I recently changed from 80 peers down to 20 peers, and you can see how my network traffic dropped significantly down there. So I went from like $25 a day to $5 a day just by changing that one setting. But yeah, it'll give you all sort of insight into like how your validator is doing, so that you can make business decisions as well as security decisions, and just be prepared for anything that comes up. But yeah, I would love to hear from you guys what you think on like your favorite monitoring practices. Maybe share a story of when it saved you or something. I don't know. Go for it.
So we started out using Grafana, and it's, you know, there's metrics built into Tendermint for Grafana, but we just found it really difficult to create alerts from. You have to basically manually create alerts for every single network you join. And there's just like no templating in it for alerts. So, but it is really pretty to look at, and it gives you a lot of good information as a dashboard. But we went and started using Zabbix instead, and it was someone else in the Cosmos actually put me on the Zabbix. I don't remember who it was, and I can't credit them with it because of that, which is a shame. But we basically started using it, fell in love with it. The automatic alerting and templating is phenomenal for new nodes. You basically, once you connect it and give it the template, it sets up all of the base alerts automatically, so you don't have to go through and configure each one individually, but you can modify them if you want. So what we did was create more dashboards for Zabbix, which can query nodes for additional information to display specific to validating. So we've made our stuff available on the Kingnodes GitHub as well, if people want to try and start using Zabbix. It does need a bit of an update. It's a little bit old now, but it has saved my ass a lot. With your alerting, you tend to get metrics that, if you regularly review them, like every couple of days, you can get a picture with experience of things that may be starting to go wrong before they go wrong. So that is, you know, the advantage of having a robust monitoring system. You can get those early indicators of something that's starting to go wrong, particularly around storage and memory use and stuff like that. But you know, the other thing there is with your alerting, if something has gone wrong, or you know, you're getting to that outside limits of what's acceptable, you can get alerted and you can come in and fix things before they go catastrophic. So the other type of monitoring that we use is tender duty by block pane. And what that does is it monitors your signed blocks by connecting to a socket into an RPC. And every single block, it'll check to see if it's got your signature on it. And you can set a threshold amount. So say, I think the default is 3 blocks. If you miss 3 blocks of signing, it'll send you an alert through PagerDuty straight to your phone, or however you've got PagerDuty set up. And then, you can go and immediately start investigating what the problem is. Sometimes you might just miss 3 blocks and get an alert, and it might just go right back to signing. And it might have just been, a connection to the network problem or something like that. But that's sort of, 2 different types of monitoring that give you 2 different types of insights to your nodes. I imagine the way that the Horcrux monitoring is done is probably a little bit different.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit. We do still do kind of the same high level metrics. So Strangelove develops a tool called Half-Life, and that uses the Cosmos SDK, and you can configure it to reach out to all of your different sentries and also a reference RPC node. And it does the same sort of deal where it looks through the blocks to see if your signature is in there. And then it will give you an alert if any critical thresholds have passed. So it will just post messages in the channel for things like if you miss a block here and there. But yeah, you can define, what are the critical thresholds, and that's where it will tag you by your Discord handle. So things like, the slashing period uptime, the recent missed blocks, whether the individual sentry nodes are reachable or out of sync, if the chain is halted. So those kind of high level metrics. But yeah, then we are currently building out our monitoring stack to go a little bit deeper than that, to pull from the Prometheus endpoints on the Horcrux nodes as well as the Sentry nodes, so that we can have a much better picture into specific things. And then we'll have alerts for like disk space before it runs out of disk space well in advance. And yeah, we're thinking about maybe we add some form of automatic disk expansion in the future, where it would alert you that happens, but then it's one less thing you have to worry about on a daily basis.
Awesome, great stuff. All right, yeah, so let's talk about this, the last point, and then we'll kind of like open it up to questions. But one of the big things in being a validator is being involved, right? Whether it's voting on governance proposals, helping test out new binaries on testnet and stress testing the network. I know we have a lot of people from Kujira listening, and we're kind of doing that on the Harpoon 4 network before they launch in July. Educating future validators like we're doing right now, being active on social media, just like discussing things on Agora, like governance discussions. What kind of ways are you guys involved in the community right now, or what are some good ways that you think people that are validators can get involved in the community?
So we think it is very important for validators to be involved with governance for the chains they validate on. And one of the more common things now is to discuss proposals on commonwealth.im for the relevant network before they go to governance vote, which it just gives like a good avenue for people to provide their perspectives on what's being proposed and modifications to be made to proposals before they actually go live. Because once they go live, they can't really be changed. So it's good to be involved with those discussions. I think it's important, not necessarily every vote that you make, but certainly ones that affect the network greatly, to be transparent and communicate your vote to your community on Twitter, just so that if people are delegating to you and they're following you on the social platforms that they can know then how you're voting on behalf of them, and if they disagree, then they can go and do their own vote to override your vote that you've made on their behalf. But also, in general, as a validator, I don't necessarily think that this is a great thing, but to make it, you really need to be active on social media and try and engage with your communities and build a community around your brand to be able to get delegations. So it's not as easy as just turning the damn thing on and the delegations roll in. You really have to go looking for them and try to provide, value to your community to be able to build your brand. There's a couple of things that we've discovered as we've sort of progressed. So that's probably all I can say on that.
Yeah, I think you covered everything I was going to say, but one other thing that we're noticing is becoming ever more important is validators being participant in the code reviews of these upgrades before they go live. Because things can sneak through where the whole team has code reviewed it, but it just wasn't enough. There was a critical bug that was missed. So if the validator teams do have the capacity to do the code reviews, I think that definitely helps to keep the chains more solid. Yeah,
I totally agree with that. And we've talked a lot about this publicly lately. And just keep in mind that not everyone needs to be a coder and not everyone needs to be able to do code reviews, but certainly if you're a validator and you have the capacity in your team and the expertise to be able to do that, you really, are doing a solid service to your network and the other validators by going through and doing code reviews. There's so many things that are easily missed, and obviously the more eyes on the problem, the less chance of a bug getting through. I know Putmos loves to go do code reviews.
Yeah, I see him clapping, I think. Is that clapping or is he raising his hand? I don't know. I'll invite him up to speak anyways, just in case. Oh, looks like he wanted to speak. Cool. Let's give him a second to come up.
He's like really mashing the emojis.
He is. I don't see him coming up though. I've invited him. Maybe he's on the browser and just very emotional right now, or emotional. Awesome. Let's see. Yeah, I think those are all great things. I did want to open it up to questions in case anyone had any questions for any of us. Feel free to just request to speak or raise your hand and I'll try to see you and invite you up. Or if you're not on a mobile device and you can't speak, feel free to switch over and we'll do this for a few minutes.
So I see, there's like a lot of other validators getting around here. Rhino's here, Pupmos, Tricky, a lot of involved people in here. So yeah, come up and have a chat, guys. Give some perspective on how you guys run things.
I'm going to go ahead and invite those ones you mentioned. So I invited Putmos, I invited Rhino. Was there another one you mentioned?
Tricky. I'm pretty sure these guys do valid. I know that Cosmos Spaces maybe, or I think it's Cosmos Spaces.
Okay, cool. I got him. You can invite Marty too. I know he's pretty connected to the Validator and Cosmos community.
And sorry, Tricky, I get confused between Cosmos Spaces and Spark. I'm not sure which one you're involved with.
Yeah, I believe Spark is doing a workshop tomorrow. I think I just saw that in the Kujira Discord as well too. Looks like they're going to be doing like a SIMD or a Cosmos Hub kind of like tutorial, taking people through how to actually build a validator by hand. So I definitely recommend checking that out. I'm going to share the link real quick on that too.
Yeah, I really love the the Cosmos spaces and the IBC communities. I've listened to them often when they're just having chats with the Cosmos community. It's really good listening.
Yeah, actually, I don't see it advertised on Twitter. If you're in the Kujira Discord, in the events, you can find the link to it. So I think it's over in their Discord server. Maybe I can just bring this over real quick.
In the Spark Discord server?
Yeah, I think I'm bringing this over to the screen share right now. But yeah, if you go to the Spark Discord server, here's the tweet for it. Let me pin this one.
So there was a question on the Twitch chat. This question is from Netrom666. So there's a question about Prometheus and Grafana. I've set it up according to KJ's instructions, but somehow I'm not getting any validator data, validator health and validator stats. Do not get any data, while chain health and hardware health do get data. Any clues? I don't use Prometheus and Grafana anymore, but I suspect that there might be a configuration problem with your config.yaml, and just keep in mind that you need to restart your nodes after you change anything in the config.yaml, but Dan might have a better idea of what your problem could be.
Yeah, one of the things I was going to say, so if you go to the Defiantlabs GitHub page, there's this module I'm working on called the Terraform Cosmos Node Skill. Basically lets you install any kind of Cosmos-based node in AWS. But in the install monitor, it kind of gives you an idea of like how to actually get monitoring set up. So you need a few things in addition to Prometheus on there. So Prometheus is basically the collector of all the metrics, right? Grafana will display them. But I'm guessing this is what you're missing, is that you're missing the Cosmos exporter, which actually is a binary that hits all the Cosmos nodes, collects data from them, not from the Prometheus metric port, but I believe it's from the RPC interface or something, because these only come in after you create a validator, and that will pull in those metrics. And then if you want like the nice like node kind of stats, you need to install node exporter. Where is it? Prometheus, Cosmos exporter, node exporter. And you can get that from the Prometheus GitHub page as well. And that'll give you the disk space, the network traffic, all that kind of stuff. So each one of these kind of visuals comes from a different metric standpoint.
So I just want to mention that some of these do need to go on your validating node, and some don't need to go on their validating node. So just keep just be mindful that the more of these metrics exporters and stuff that you run on your nodes, they actually do use resources. And if you're already on the edge, you might tip yourself over the edge by putting too many exporters and stuff onto the one box. So, it depends on what metrics it's collecting. But, so for example, this node exporter, it actually gives metrics based on your system performance, not the network performance. So that has to go onto your node that you want those metrics from. But then, some other exporters might actually just connect to an RPC and collect information from the network, which, you might not even have an RPC enabled on your validator node. So, that could go on a Sentry or something like that and collect that information without adding load to your validator. So Marty's got his hand up, man. Just unmute yourself and come and have a chat.
Yep, go for it, Marty.
Maybe he's on the browser.
Sorry about that.
There he is.
So is the dinosaur here? Oh yeah, that name was given to me by Jacob. I think a lot about the evolution of network management in the internet, starting in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s, and how that happened with the models there. So, and then how that would map into, this very, very beginnings of kind of monitoring here the validators in the Cosmos spaces. And so, we decided to, write a tool which we release here today in beta form and browse. And part of the mapping is, everybody loves their phone, right? So I think tools that work on the phone are useful. But, I'm trying to understand, what happens when, you have this, let's look at the chain, which is open to all, and then let's look at, the kernel of Ubuntu and tell me, what's going on there and its disk spaces and whatever else. And, at what point in time in monitoring a chain or having tools that monitor the chain, does the chain itself be impacted by that monitoring? Right? Any thoughts here in its evolution? I think Ping Hub. We basically build a multi-chain Ping Hub to look at all the validators across all the chains, and it's going to have some impact in retrieval, right?
I mean, I definitely agree that you probably want to make sure you have separation between your monitoring stack and the actual nodes in some cases, because if that instance goes down, not only does your node go down, your monitoring solution goes down too, so you might not even be notified of it, right? But yeah, I don't have any experience with monitoring significantly slowing down the performance, but maybe someone else does have that.
How many people run Ping Hub, do you think? Is it 30,000 people running this, across the world, or is it 100,000, or is it 300, for instance?
I'm not sure. No idea, really.
If 30,000 people were, running Ping Hub, and I'm just using it as a reference because some people are familiar with it, but basically anybody can run that. At what point in time, what's the threshold where that impacts the network? Specifically, the chain. So, I think in terms of TCP/IP, stuff. So forgive me for my language.
So I don't have any experience with what you're discussing here, man. So I can't really provide any perspective for that.
Okay. So we perceived, in this tool design that we came up with in our release, is that there's kind of two thresholds. Threshold one is, let's monitor, basically the chain, which is open to all. And then threshold two is, what's going on inside, Ubuntu, from memory to disk to whatever else. Those are two kinds of thresholds. But we definitely want to do a multi-chain and display that multi-chain. And, we think that's important for us because, I get, page texted or whatever I can get, out to dinner, and in my pocket is my phone. So I need to look at some set of things, just from my phone, not just from, web browser on a big screen. And is that significant to other people or not? It's an assumption on our part.
Yeah, I think in terms of being able to view your monitoring, it's important to have a solution that you can use on your phone. But I don't know, from a perspective of being alerted, we use PagerDuty and send through information along with the alert to get some context. But I mean, Zabbix is not very good to view from mobile, but you can view it on your mobile browser. So I guess you're talking about a solution that's going to give you metrics available in a mobile first environment. Is that what you're saying?
That's one of the questions. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. It's good to have a mobile first environment for your for your monitoring or being able to view your monitoring.
So
Yeah, I think what most people end up doing is using webhooks, and like they'll have something like Discord on their phone, but that only gives you limited information about what's going on, and it doesn't like really help automate the incident response thing. Like if it's like, hey, you ping your entire team on the weekend that something went down, you don't need everyone to go in to fix it. Maybe only one engineer needs to go in. So like handling things like that, being like, yep, someone's on it, they're going in to fix it. So I think there's definitely a use case for that.
Got it. So
yeah, and that's the good thing about using PagerDuty too, is that you can have on-call schedules so that only the people who are on call get your alerts.
So one of the things that happened in the maturation of network management in the internet was ultimately the people operating the infrastructure were not doing code reviews. Okay, so it was the Cisco people or the Ascend people or whoever were doing code reviews, and the people that operated the infrastructure were doing flow reviews, right? How is this actually flowing about through the BGP points or with the inside their network, whatever else. But for those who started in the 80s, like me, we had to write the code and operate the infrastructure. But eventually we got out of writing the code and we got out of reviewing the code, and we worked on tools, mathematical tools, heuristics that were watching other things and not doing kind of code review. So that's that. If that happens here, that tells us, or if you parallel that here, it tells us maybe kind of what the tools ultimately need to look like, and what the skills are of people who are basically the operators. Just a point of view from the past as a dinosaur, and I'll let you guys, talk about other things. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, thanks for coming up, man.
Anyone else from the community have any questions or want to share anything? If not, I figured I'd give it last word to the speakers if they want to talk about like what they're doing or how people can learn more about what they're building, and then we'd wrap it up. I don't see anyone, so let's go Null, Andrew, and then me and Kyle will finish out.
So I think we've already covered like a fair bit of information that you need to become a validator, but I just want to reiterate that you can give it a go if you're on the fence and you just want to give it a go, or know what it's all about, or just have a better knowledge of the network through playing around with nodes and stuff. You just give it a go. Jump onto a test net somewhere. There's Kujira testnet at the moment. There's a bunch of test nets. There's always a test net going on, like Osmosis and Juno and Stargaze, and any of these WASM chains always have a running test net for developers to be able to test their stuff on before they go to the mainnet. So it's an easy way to wet your feet. You can just jump in there, jump onto a Discord, ask someone for some tokens, they'll send them through to you, and you can just get started that way. And that's going to help you build your knowledge, and it's going to help you be able to make decisions better if you ever want to join the mainnet. And you'll find people there who are always willing to help you. If you want some good documentation, some of the bigger projects have good docs with explainers on how to get started. Docs.junonetwork.io has a pretty decent suite of docs there to get node operators started, and a lot of people find that as an easy way to get through their first node deployment. But yeah, other than that, just get in, have a go, get active in the network communities, and have fun.
Awesome. And where can people find out more about Kingnodes if they're interested?
Yeah, so we have our website, which is just kingnodes.com, and we also all our socials are at Kingnodes or at Null memes. So yeah, if you have an issue or something, you just want to talk to someone about it, I'm usually pretty respondent to most of those places. I prefer Discord because if I can't help you there, someone else probably could. But yeah, people ping me on Twitter and Telegram, and if I'm free, I am usually able to help.
Awesome. Andrew?
Yeah. So yeah, thanks everyone for coming online. Strangelove is all about Cosmos and IBC. So we're happy to hear about new projects that we could help out with, provide support for things like validators, relayers, so on. So yeah, if you're interested in Horcrux, we have a support channel, and we'd be happy to help you plan out the deployment, talk through security, availability, all those kinds of things. But yeah, we're on Twitter, GitHub, Discord, Telegram, you name it. So yeah, feel free to ping me if you want some help getting plugged in.
Awesome. Kyle?
Hey guys. Yeah, I mean, I think I described what I was working on earlier. And basically, Dan and I, Defiantlabs, are working with Strangelove and ICF on a grant to do to write a tax app for all the Cosmos ecosystem. Obviously, we're going to have to focus on certain chains more than others for, chain specific modules, but the concept is basically to support all of the generic Cosmos SDK modules and messages that come with those. And, to give people software that'll make doing their taxes much, much easier than it is now. So, yeah, anyway, thanks everybody for the discussion, especially Null and Andrew is really good.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll just follow that on that, it's another part of being a validator too, is that you have to make sure you understand how to do the taxes, especially in the States. And we're hoping to help not only users of the Cosmos, but also validators be able to kind of track their taxes. But yeah, if you want to learn more about what we're doing, our socials are all in the Defiantlabs Twitter, but defiantlabs.net, at Defiantlabs, pretty much everywhere. And yeah, I'm also very active in a lot of Discord communities. So if you ever want to ask a question, feel free to reach out to me there. But appreciate all you guys coming on, especially appreciate Andrew and Noel and Kyle for joining and sharing their thoughts, and the people that came out to speak, like Marty.
Thanks for having us, man.
Yeah, this will be recorded, and I will post that out. Appreciate it, guys.
Thanks, Dan. Have a good one, everyone. See ya.
Take care.
Thanks, guys. Bye.